So, good evening and welcome to the Kansas City Public Library. I'm Henry Fortunato, Director of Public Affairs. Thanks for joining us for our continuing series of talks by authors of contemporary African American fiction. Tonight featuring Kimberla Lawson Roby, author of 9 standalone titles and the 10-part Reverend Curtis Black series. Now joined by the just published 11th volume, The Prodigal Son, which I finished about half an hour ago. And if you haven't read it, you should. If you've started reading it, the ending is, well, I won't reveal it, but, you'd be mad, and the epilogue ties it all together, and somehow, I don't know, I have a feeling there's going to be a 12th edition in this series. So speaking of that, before I get rid of I leave the podium, it strikes me that some of you might be members of book clubs. Is that a possibility? And if so, could you raise your hand if you're a member of a book club? Okay, that's great. Now, it just so happens that we have one of the nationally recognized award-winning Reader's Services librarians at the Kansas City Public Library. She's standing back there, or she could come to the side a little bit. Her name is Katie Stover. Like me, she's originally from Long Island and found a home here in the Heartland. And if those of you are looking for suggestions for your book club groups, if you're looking for ideas for other books to read, it'd be good to visit with Katie on your way out. She reads about 4,000 books a month and can give you all kinds of great recommendations. I will tell you from personal experience, both my oldest son and my young daughter, there's a middle kid who's not there, but my older son and my young daughter, Katie is their personal librarian, and she recommends books to them all the time. So I recommend that you visit with Katie. Anyway, normally it's my job at these events to introduce the evening's speaker over the course of 3 minutes. Tonight I'm going to take no more than 30 additional seconds of your time. That's because tonight's formal intro duties this evening will be performed by one of Kansas City's leading radio personalities, Julie Jones of Hot 103 Jams KPRS. She herself is at work on a novel right now. She's thinking seriously about following that with a nonfiction book about her life in radio. And naturally, we want her to come back here and talk about that too. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Julie Jones.
Hey, my lovely lady friends, how are we tonight? And we got some fellas in the building as well. Welcome, fellas in the place. How you doing? Of course, when I found out that Kim Roby was coming to town, I was like, I got to go introduce her. This is my girl. I've never got to meet her until now, but it feels like we have a real relationship. I've interviewed her on the radio, and if you guys are Facebook friends with Kim, you know she will answer your Facebooks, your Twitters, like Kim just said, sometimes people are like, is this really you? But it is really her, because she is that personable, and not only that, she is in touch with her fans, which is why we truly love and adore her. Of course, her latest book, The Prodigal Son, how many have read it? Reverend Curtis Black's son, he's special. And the wonderful thing about the Reverend Curtis Black series is, don't you think he's real? Is it just me? Like, you be in your head like, ooh, Reverend, you tried it? Ooh, girl, you did it? And that's what we love about Kim Roby, because she brings fiction to life, but it's very serious subject matter. One book that she had on a girl being molested, if you read that book, definitely some heart-wrenching tales that go on. And even though it's fiction, we know that this is probably somebody's life, right? So we love the way that Kim has the talent and the ability to bring characters to life and to speak to issues that you and I hear about or experience every day. Am I right on that? So of course, you know, I thought about reading her bio, but I believe in speaking from the the heart, because I'm just that real type of sister. I don't want to get real formal. But we love when we embrace her as a writer and as a person. And we look forward to future projects that she has. Her first Christmas novel, which she'll tell you about later this evening, is going to be out in this fall. So, of course, you know her many accolades, New York Times best-selling novelist. We know her as Kimberla Lawson Roby, someone who fans of Kansas City absolutely adore. So let's stand up and give my girl a big welcome tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Wow, thank you all so much for coming out. Gosh, you came out in great numbers, and I certainly appreciate that. I haven't been to Kansas City in a few years. Where's Kim Riley? I'm looking for her now. Oh, okay. Kim Riley had this wonderful event, and so I came a few years back, but haven't had an opportunity to get here on my tour in a while, and so it's just a great opportunity to be here. I appreciate the warm welcome and the love and all the support, and just for all of you reading my books, because you allowed me to have this career in writing that I love so much. And so I'm just very, very grateful for that. Usually when I start out, of course, I'm always thanking readers just like I'm doing now. And I learned after a certain amount of years passed, once the Reverend Curtis Black books came out, that I was always happy to get the applause, and I thought that was great and wonderful. But it wasn't long before I realized it was really the Reverend Curtis Black that people were clapping for. Had nothing to do with Kimberla Lawson Roby. And so he precedes me everywhere I go. If people don't know who Kimberla Lawson Roby is, they always know who the Reverend Curtis Black is when we're talking about him. And it's just been an interesting journey overall, because what a lot of my readers don't know, and I'm sure a lot of you don't know, is that it was never my intention to write a series about Curtis, about the problems in the church. I'd written my first book, if some of you has read that. It's called Behind Closed Doors. Then I wrote Here and Now, which is my second. And so by the time I was preparing to write the third book, I said to my husband I needed to write a synopsis for my publisher to let them know what the story was going to be about. And I said, I've written about real life social issues with the first two books, and I've gotten lots of great feedback from my readers. So many of them were saying they couldn't put it down because they could relate their own lives to the stories or the characters, or if they had not experienced what my characters were dealing with, they knew family members or friends who had. And so I said, this time I want it to be something, though, that everyone will know about or will have heard about in one way or another. And so you can blame him, because he said, what about all of the issues going on in our churches? Because, I don't know what goes on here in Kansas City, but we knew what was going on in Rockford, Illinois. And so I listened to him, and I thought, that might be interesting to write about. And at that point, didn't know, what I would write about exactly, what I would take it from. And so I thought, well, what about some of the issues with pastors, those who are consumed with money and power and women and lots of women and lots of women. So, I knew there was a story there, because I had heard and seen a lot. I share all the time that I wasn't just born into church. My mother carried me there in her womb. And so I didn't have to do a lot of research to write this book either. And so from there, I created this man, the Reverend Curtis Black, who is a mixture of many, many men in the ministry that I have experienced and known about and met throughout the years. And then built these characters around. And so in Casting the First Stone, if you read that, you know that he has this wonderful wife in Tanya, and of course treats her awfully. And he is just from one woman to the next, and he's focused on money and how much more he can make of it and how much he can kind of weasel out of the congregation. And that's who he is. He's a lot different today, thank God. But at that time, he certainly was not the man. You didn't want to see him standing in your pulpit on Sunday morning, I'll tell you that. And so I wrote the book. And so one thing that I did not consider while writing it, and I'm glad that I didn't, because I probably would have stopped and just pushed it to the side and moved on to a whole different subject. What I did not consider was what was the reaction going to be as I started traveling around the country promoting the book. What were ministers going to say? And not just ministers, but ministers' wives and even members of congregations. I worried for a little bit that they would want to know, why are you airing the dirty laundry of the church? We know that this all goes on, but it was sort of hush-hush. You didn't hear people always talking about it as openly. But I had written the book, and my publisher had scheduled the tour, and so I knew it was, something I would just have to deal with if it came about. But to my surprise, as we started out, even just with the first couple of events, I had pastors' wives coming up to me when they were getting their book signed, say, "Thank you for writing my story. Thank you for writing what so many of our members don't know. They may see us on Sunday morning, and maybe we have the happy faces, and maybe we're dressed in the nice suit, but they have no idea what we're dealing with in our household the other 6 days in the week." And I never forgot that. And that has continued on and on. That book came out in 2000. So for 14 years, I've heard one story after another. And so much so that even pastors, who I say, these pastors certainly could not be like Curtis Black because they support what I do. And them and their wives will invite me to come into their churches to speak to their women's ministries or to have book signing events. And so there's just been lots and lots of support. Usually the question comes up, but has there ever been anyone, any minister who has kind of called you out on it and been upset? And interestingly enough, I had a woman contact me by email a few years ago, and she said, normally if someone criticizes an author's book or they say, you shouldn't read that, I wouldn't even contact the author to tell them something negative like that. She said, but I think when I finish and you read this email, you'll appreciate it. And so she said she was at her own church one Sunday morning, and the pastor got up. He had heard about the books that I was writing, and Casting the First Stone, was the one that he was really speaking of. And he said, I don't appreciate that. I don't want you all reading it. This is just not the kind of thing, that you should be focused on and discussing. And so it kind of went from there. And she said, the reason that I'm emailing you is to let you know that people rushed out to the bookstore. And so, they always say all publicity is good publicity, even bad sometimes, and in that case, I guess it really was. But for the most part, again, it's been a great experience. And although as any fiction writer will likely tell you, you do hope that you will entertain your readers. Our hope is that you will want to keep turning the pages and that you will get enjoyment from it, that you will even laugh sometimes. But for me, I always like to make sure I share too that while I'm writing about problems and corruption in the church, that underlying message for me in my books and from my own personal opinion and my own faith is that we just really need to be careful in terms of who our spiritual and Christian leaders are. We should spend a lot more time worshiping God than we do another human being standing in the pulpit, and read the word for ourselves, and certainly work on our own personal relationship with God and really focus on treating every other human being the way we want to be treated. And so in my books, that's why you see consequences. So Curtis may have done this, that, and the other in Casting the First Stone, but he doesn't get away with it. He gets kicked out, and he loses his wife. But then what he does, is the same as a lot of ministers that some of you have known and heard about throughout the years is, well, he just moved on to a new wife and a new church. And so in that book, the second one, that was too much of a good thing. And that's the book that I never thought that I would write. And so again, I had not planned on writing a series. So I wrote Casting the First Stone. But then I moved on to another book called It's a Thin Line. And then I wrote a book called A Taste of Reality. And I would go out to my book signing events and speaking engagements, the same as this. And readers were very nice and kind. And they say, well, that was a nice book. But what is the Reverend Curtis Black up to? And, I'd be kind of quiet, but in my mind, I'd be thinking, well, he's not up to anything, He's kind of moved on. I've moved on. He's got his life, and, that's sort of it. And I kind of ignored it. And I think I was afraid to write another story about the same character and the same storyline, the same family, because I didn't want to repeat myself. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to keep it fresh. And, as readers, you would say, well, this is nothing different than what she's already done. That was my fear. But my literary agent had gone to a dental appointment of all places in New York and checked in, and she said it was a pretty large dental office, and so there was this row of receptionists. And she sat down just waiting for her appointment or waiting for her time to be called in. And the receptionists were having a very lively conversation. And she said they were very vocal about this awful pastor. And so she said they were kind of going on. And she said, my first thought was, this must be the reason that Kim's book is so popular. People can really relate to what's going on in the story. And so she said they continued. She said, and I couldn't help it. I was eavesdropping and listening to it and, wondering who it was. And so she said, then one of them said something about what the pastor had done, and it was really bad. And then another one said, I'm telling you, that's why I can't stand that Curtis Black. And so she thought, wow, they're talking about the book. This is not a real character. And so she said, I could not resist. I got up and went and introduced myself to them and explained that I was your representative, and just wanted to know why they felt so strongly about the story. And they were reading the books. And she said, and it was as I thought. They knew who he was, and that they felt the way that I learned eventually was that Curtis was alive and well in every single city in the country. And so... Not that that's a good thing, but he is, unfortunately. And so she said to me, I know you don't want to write a sequel, you don't want to turn this into a series, but when you have readers who are very loyal, the way that yours are, and they support you in the manner that they do, you have this obligation to give them what they're asking for. And so that's how Too Much of a Good Thing came about. Curtis thought he was a little bit smarter in Too Much of a Good Thing because he thought, well, guess what? Tanya questioned me too much and she really didn't let me get away with a lot. So this time I'm going to marry a woman who knows her place. And so he marries Mariah, who's very meek and mild for the most part, very passive. And he has a second church. Well, at the end of that book, we know that he loses Mariah. Mariah is not as dumb as he thinks. And he moves on to Charlotte. He marries the third wife, but this time he has met his match. And she's worse than he ever was. But then where he does become smart is he decides, I've been kicked out of Faith Missionary Baptist Church. Then I was kicked out of Truth Missionary Baptist Church. And so this time, so that I can never, ever be kicked out again, I'll found my own church. And so now he is the pastor and founder of Deliverance Outreach. And the story has continued. So I wrote that third book thinking, okay, Curtis will have gotten it back. Charlotte has dished out and given him everything and then some. And I thought maybe that's what readers wanted to see. And I would call this a trilogy because we have many series that are just trilogies, and that would be the end of it. But after that came out, and I don't know if it's because Aaron burned the house down or what it was, but readers were asking me way more often after that. I received tons of emails saying, when is the next Reverend Curtis Black title coming out? And so then I stopped and I thought, well, maybe I just don't know how to end a story because I don't know how much more, how longer this can go on. But I wrote Love and Lies, and I thought, well, I won't write it in Curtis's voice. I wrote it in Charlotte's voice and her best friend, Janine. So that story was a little different than the other three. And then I wrote a fifth book, and I had really figured out, I thought, how to end it. I knew what you all were looking for. I had just decided it, and I thought, this is it. I have a lot of readers of faith, and people want to see people turn their lives around. We all hope that people can improve and do better. And just become better individuals. And so I wanted him to repent. I wanted him to become a genuine, true man of God, a faithful husband to his wife, and remain a great father. Because if one thing Curtis is he's always loved his children and always been a great father no matter what. And so I thought, this is what everybody is looking for. It'll be 5 books. This will be the end of it. So I wrote Sin No More. All was well. And then I received way more messages again. And so I was worried, though. I will tell all of you honestly, and all jokes aside, I was really worried at that point because I started thinking, well, how much more can the man do, So I really was at a crossroads, and I just kept saying, I don't know. And if I'm going to have to keep writing about Curtis, and I don't feel like I have so much more to write about him, maybe my career is over. And I started thinking about other careers, and I'm being very honest with that because I just didn't know how to go on. And so I kept saying that to my husband. I don't think that I can write anymore about him. And he said to me as simply as, well, guess what? Victor Newman has been doing it for over 30 years. So we continued. And so I thought, well, maybe he does have a little more life in him. And then I moved on, as you know, to Curtis's daughter, Alicia, in The Best of Everything, and also Be Careful What You Pray For. And we quickly learn in those books that she's every bit of who her father is. The apple does not fall very far from the tree. And so she ruins a perfectly good marriage with a wonderful man. And things are great, but she is her father, and there's this drug dealer, and of all people, a pastor's daughter, is attracted to this drug dealer and this whole glamorous life because she doesn't believe her husband's $80,000 a year salary is enough to give her the things that she's been used to. And so that happens, and then she moves on, and when that marriage is over, then she marries a pastor named J.T. Valentine, and J.T. could put Curtis to shame in the way that he used to be. And so she learns that you really should be careful what you pray for. He had all the money and the large church and all of that, but he was the worst husband that she could have ever chosen. And so then the stories have just continued and gone on and on. I'll tell you a little bit about Alicia, and it would be interesting to hear what all of you think. I get lots of comments from readers saying, so, what about Levi? And, women aren't ashamed to tell me they know he's a drug dealer, he's a bad boy, but he's a gorgeous bad boy and drug dealer. And so they want to know if he's coming back. And so I'll say, well, it's kind of interesting, that you would ask that because he's in prison now, So, that's kind of the end of him. And, I don't know how I could bring him back in the story. And so I was at an event a couple of years ago, and a reader said to me, well, he's in prison, but you can get him out anytime you want to. So I will tell you that the next Reverend Curtis Black book for May 2015 is about Alicia and Philip, and yes, Levi does get out of prison. And so now we fast forwarding from those stories. There's been a few more books about Curtis and Charlotte, and now we are into Matthew, who is now an adult. And in The Prodigal Son, it is my most different story because it's the first time I've told a story alternating in the voices of two male characters. So Matthew, who you've known all along and who has been with his parents for years, has always been a great child with a great heart, regardless of how much his parents have humiliated him and all of the shame and the pain that they've caused him. But now he's 20 years old. This is a child who was a straight A student, won a full 4-year academic scholarship to Harvard University. But of course, in his senior year in high school, you learn that his girlfriend is pregnant. And so, it's a devastating time for the family. Matthew's not made really any real mistakes to talk about, certainly not any mistakes comparable to the ones his parents has made. But they still encourage him to go on to school. They don't want him to lose his scholarship. They don't want him to miss out on getting a great education. And even his girlfriend Raquel's parents want Matthew to get his education, and they share how they will help take care of the child. But of course, that's not good enough for Charlotte, because Charlotte believes, look, I am not just one of the grandmothers, I'm the only grandmother that counts, So forget the other two grandparents. She believes she should totally take over this child, little MJ, when he's born. And if you read A House Divided, you know how that turned out and all the problems that she caused. And so Matthew had to finally, after all these years, separate himself from his parents, cut them off completely. And as this story opens, he has not spoken to them in over a year. They are totally estranged at this point. But he's 20 years old. He has dropped out. He finally made the decision to do that. He has married Raquel. They're raising their 1-year-old son, but he's never been more miserable in his life. And then Dillon, who is now, the true firstborn child of Reverend Curtis Black, and you've just met him a year ago, and the rest of the family has just met him a year ago, but he's 29, and this is the child that Curtis knew was born right after his college years, but he completely denied him and even had the DNA test manipulated so that it would prove that he was not the father. So Curtis was awful even before he entered the pulpit. But Dillon is on the scene. He wants his rightful place as that firstborn child. He wants the love and attention of Curtis. Really can't stand his other siblings because he believes they've already had their time with his father, and so now it's his turn. But when he starts to feel like he's not getting the attention and the love that he believes that he deserves, he really starts to play dirty. He becomes very deceitful, and he's not very likable, and I'm sure any of you who have already read it can attest to that. And so you get to see these two sons, and it's kind of interesting. It's the prodigal son, and they both kind of are to some degree because, you know, of the story in the Bible and how the son comes back. But in the very beginning, you learn that while one is fighting hard to get out and stay out of the family, and the other is fighting hard and doing everything he can to get in. And so that's the contrast. And so I hope that, you know, you will enjoy this story. It is different, but I've heard lots of great feedback already from readers who have read it. Lots of 5-star reviews, and so it's just kind of exciting that after 11 books, you know, that there is still some interest in the storyline. Every now and then I'll hear someone say, you know, I really read your other books because I write the standalone titles, as you know, the other half of the year. Those will come out, and some of my readers will say, well, I'm a little tired of him, but for the most part, you know, if you have still about 90% of your readers saying more Curtis, then, you know, I kind of have to keep writing about the Reverend Curtis Black, and I do think now that the children have grown up, it has turned into this family saga, and we know Katrina eventually has to grow up as well, so, you know, you'll soon be reading about her somewhere down the road. So I, you know, will share with you just before I want to allow you an opportunity to ask some questions or make any comments that you want to. But before I do that, I know there's always aspiring writers in every audience, and sometimes just as an individual reader, no matter what it is you're wanting to do in life, if you have these goals and these dreams and things that you've always wanted to do, it doesn't have to have anything to do with writing and publishing. I like to share my story because I just always hope that it will inspire you to not give up on it and to continue. And I say that because I was at a point in my life after I started writing where I had made the decision to give up. And had I done that, I just wouldn't have even met all of you. I wouldn't be standing before you as a writer who has published the 20th book. But in 1995, when I was 30 years old, I just felt like something was missing. I had worked at a number of companies in corporate America. I had worked for the state of Illinois. I had worked for the city of Rockford, Illinois, but always in the business arena. And I just always felt that there was this void. I never felt like I was moving up the career ladder the way that I knew I should have been. And just something was missing. And so when I sat down and just started thinking about what could I do on my own, I thought back. For some reason, I thought back to my elementary school teachers, and in particular, I thought about my 6th grade teacher. His name was Mr. Groff, and he would always tease me about my writing, but he was always encouraging me to do more writing and saying that I should do it as a career, that I should follow that and really work toward it as I got older. And I didn't pay a lot of attention to it, but I remember this one particular day when he had given us a writing assignment, and say, for example, too, if he gave us a paragraph to do tonight, well, that meant tomorrow morning I was turning in a full page. And so if he said tonight 1 page, then I would turn in 2 or 3 pages. And so this one day we were taking our assignments up to his desk, and he was thumbing through them as we were going back to our seats, and he came across mine and he said, Kim Lawson, why is it when I ask you what time it is, you have to build me an entire clock, you know? You know, why can't you say the time and just move on? And so he'd joke about it, and he'd say, I know I give you a hard time, I give you the business about it, but you really do have a gift with storytelling, and you really need to follow through and pursue this. I heard the same thing in junior high school from many of my teachers, specifically my journalism teacher when I wrote for the school newspaper. The same thing when I was in high school. And by the time I was in high school, though, I thought, well, I've heard it enough that maybe I should think about it. And so I started doing my research on the salaries of writers versus the salaries of people who majored in business. And I thought, well, I'm definitely not going to be a writer. I can tell you that. At that age, you know, all I was thinking about was, you know, growing up, you know, finishing college, having a successful career. And at that age, you are just thinking as a child, you want to make the most money that you possibly can. But it's also the reason now when I go into high schools and colleges and universities, I tell every student that I come across, don't make the mistake that I made. Don't let money be the deciding factor when you're figuring out what you're going to do with the rest of your life. You know, figure out what your passion is, follow your purpose, do what God has placed you on this earth to do for a number of years. Because when you're going to do something for a number of years, you really need to be happy. And I knew that the fact that I was getting up, going to work every day, that I was miserable every single one of those days, Monday through Friday, that something was definitely wrong and that I just wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. And so after thinking about that, I thought I'm going to give it a try. And so I sat down and started writing my first book. And that was in April 1995. And I started coming home every evening, and I would write from 6 to about 10 or 11 at night, every Monday through Friday. And I would do the same on Saturdays, and I would do the same on holidays. And I did that for 7 months until the book was complete. And it helped me a great deal that it became what I call a family affair, because my mom, you know, who would just say, okay, if Will has really long hours that he's working, I'll cook food for a couple of days so you guys have that. You don't have to think about that. I'll pick up the laundry and wash the clothes so you guys don't have to worry about that. When Will was not working extra hours and overtime, then he was pretty much handling everything around the house. But it was their priority, and they wanted me to finish the book. Even my brothers would call me up just to say, just checking to make sure you're writing, checking to make sure you're working on that book. And so everybody was just excited about it. At the end of that year, I had my manuscript complete, had it in hand, and I knew from the research that I had already started that publishing houses really want you to have a literary agent because they receive so many unsolicited manuscripts into the publishing house. And so I put together a list of agents, some who represented authors that I knew of, from Terry McMillan to Connie Briscoe to B.B. Moore Campbell to Elin Harris. The list just sort of went on. Agents who I knew were interested in contemporary African-American fiction. And so I compiled a list and put together my query letters and sent them out. And being very naive at that age, I thought, well, you know what, I'll just choose which one I want to go with and turn down all the rest of them, you know. And lo and behold, when the first rejection letter came in, that was one thing, but then the other and the next until I was rejected from every single person who I had submitted to. And so then I realized, wow, this won't be as easy as I thought. And I thought, well, the only other step that I have to take is to send it directly to editors at the publishing house. I knew that they didn't want it to come directly from the author, but I didn't see where I had anything to lose. And so I compiled another listing and sent them out. And so after that, I sat back and waited. And then once again, it was one rejection letter after another after another. And so at that point, that's when I thought, I've tried everything. I'm not really that person to beat a dead horse. And I decided I was just going to move on. And so my mom kept hearing me say that, and she knew I was serious about it at that point. And she said, you know, I understand how you feel. I know you're discouraged, and I don't know anything about publishing. But what I do know is that we've passed around so many copies of your manuscript to people here locally, and they've said they couldn't put it down until they finished it. And I just think that means something, and you shouldn't give up. And so finally, my husband, wonderful husband in the back of the room, said, you know, you have this background in business, so why can't you just start your own company and publish the book yourself? And that's how the whole idea of self-publishing came about. I knew nothing about it, but I bought more books and read everything that I could on the subject, did some additional research to find out what we would have to do to promote the book, not just locally or regionally, but what we would have to do to get it out on a national level. And so, you know, make a long story short, I opened my business in June 1996. That first 3,000 copies came back in the fall of that year in September, and we had an opening reception at home. It did not hurt, and I share this part because I think, gosh, it's just amazing how, you know, God will lay your path for you and have the plan in place, even when you don't know why you're in a certain place or doing a certain thing. It did not hurt that I worked for City Hall and I knew the mayor on a first name basis and saw him and worked with him in his department, even though I was a financial analyst for community development. But when he found out about it, I asked him would he be a part of the program, and then I knew state representatives because some of them had worked for the city, and they agreed. And of course that got the media on board. Every TV station came out. There was a huge newspaper article, something that just would not have happened had they not been involved. And about 500 people showed up. And so it was just a wonderful evening, and it was a Sunday night, and so we go home, and Will and I, after being so busy with getting ready for the party, we had taken Monday off as a vacation day. We're going back on Tuesday. And so my husband, who had the big bright idea about me self-publishing, even though I thought, gosh, this is a lot of money, you know, what if it doesn't work? His idea was, well, if it doesn't work, then you just move on to something else. But do you want to go, say, 10 years down the road, wondering if you could have had some success with it? So that was one thing, and I had gone through the self-publishing process. He borrowed money from his 401k account just so that I could even do that part of it. But we get home from the reception, and he says, so you know when you go to work on Tuesday, you're going to have to give your 2-week notice. And I thought, wow, the man has really lost his mind now, you know. Clearly he has. I'm not the risk taker in the household. You can probably tell that. And I thought, you know, we don't earn a lot of money, but we can pay our bills on time. We can save for a rainy day. We can save for retirement. And to me, I was just happy with that. And I liked that kind of comfort. But he said, I just don't think, you know, you're going to go very far with it. I don't think you can have success with it if you don't give it 100% of your time. And so I went to work. That was the very end of October in 1996. I gave my 2-week notice, and I have been writing full time ever since then. So it's been a wonderful journey. And then I continued on. The books started selling very well at a lot of independent bookstores, and did library events, and finally was able to get it into the major chain bookstores. And the word of mouth just really, really took on, and readers were telling other friends and family members and neighbors. And by the time the book was out in January, officially out in January 1997, it was moving so quickly in the bookstores. And these African American bookstores around the country, they were the ones who submitted their sales numbers to the bestsellers list that appeared in Essence magazine at that time. And so I received a phone call in February saying, you know, based on your first month of sales, Behind Closed Doors will be the #5 title on the paperback bestsellers list for fiction. And so I took that information and went back to agents again and said, you know, I have this many copies. I'm already, you know, beyond my first printing. It's going to be in Essence magazine in the May issue, which comes out in April. They have 1 million subscribers, and when people share it, they have 5 million readers. I had the whole spiel, you know, for my letter. And thank God one of them contacted me and said that she wanted to represent me. And she went on to contact publishers, and she found one who didn't think they could do anything more with Behind Closed Doors, but they wanted to know what I was doing for my second book. And so I didn't know, because I had not had time to think about a second one. And when I told her that, she said, well, you'd better figure it out, because, you know, we need something, because we don't want them to lose interest. And so I stopped and wrote this 9-page synopsis between the rest of that afternoon and the next morning, and sent it to her, and she went on to submit it, and they bought it just based on the 9 pages. And so I went from not getting a full manuscript published to selling a book that I had not even written yet. And so things really had started to turn around. But I share that with all of you because I have always felt like this, but I really know it to be true today more than ever before, that whether you're 18 years old or you're 80 years old, it's never too late to live out your dreams, and again, to do what God has placed you on this earth to do in the first place. So I hope you'll take that with whatever it is you're wanting to do. I share always the story that if you are someone, say you just love cleaning houses, and I, you know, have a family member who always loved to do that, and just kind of felt like, gosh, I wish I could have done more with my life, or I could have had more success, and, you know, didn't feel like she was talented really with anything. And when I would hear that, you know, I finally said, well, you just should have started a cleaning service. You know, you could have had a chain of cleaning services. So no matter what you love to do, you can find some success with it. And I just hope that, you know, you never ever forget that, and never give up on your dream no matter what. So that's kind of me and who I am and what my journey has been like, and you know, told you a little bit about the Curtis Black stories. And then my other books, you know, those are about real life social issues as well, sometimes controversial, sometimes taboo, but I try my best to write about the issues that any of us can, might, and sometimes do deal with on a daily basis, and usually issues that I don't think we talk about enough. And if you've read some of my books, you know I touch on mental issues quite a bit with some of my characters, but I think sometimes that's sort of pushed to the side. And, you know, we may have family members or friends who are dealing with it, and we choose to believe that it's just not that bad, and that they'll just get better on their own, when in many cases they really, really need professional help. So now I'll allow you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have, whether it be about the books or publishing or about me, whatever it might be. Please feel free to do so now. Go ahead. Thank you very much. Yes, go ahead.
Would you consider maybe your book turning into like a television series like Soul Food?
I know that's always been my hope. Oh, okay, yes, I will. The question is, have I ever considered turning any of my books into a TV series, such as Soul Food? And so I get that question, especially about the Reverend Curtis Black series, whether to the big screen or to a TV series. And so I hope, and I've had offers, especially over the last year, but I'm just really taking my time and just praying, to make the right move, because I know once I sign, that's it. And, I just want to, I guess, myself have this comfort zone. It's probably the easiest way for me to say it. So we'll see. And now I am hearing more. I used to hear just movie, at a theater, but I do hear more TV series now over the last few years. And I laugh now whenever I hear the question, because a couple of years ago, I did a library event in Chicago. And so we were having a conversation the same as here and just talking about the books, and that subject came up. And so one woman said to me, she said, now, this is the only thing, we really would prefer a TV series, but it can't be on Thursday night. And so... And so I told her, and I said, no, I agree with you, because if it comes on when Scandal comes on, I won't be able to watch it either. Yes.
Probably more of a statement than a question, but I love reading your books. I've read them before the Curtis Black series, and a friend of mine gave me Casting the First Stone.
Yes.
When I read that, I was absolutely hooked.
Oh.
And I knew that I had to come tonight, because my question you answered was, how did you come up with all the stuff that Curtis Black does? I couldn't imagine anybody with that kind of imagination. And then some of your other books, I was always intrigued. And then at the end, and I think it's Love and Lies, when she hit her mom and killed her. That floored me, because I was like, where did that come from? So, like you said with Victor, I was in high school and Victor was doing stuff. So, sister, you keep on writing.
Thank you.
Now when I bring a book,
Oh, wow.
I can read.
Thank you. So I'm always very proud when I hear that men are reading my story, so thank you for that.
We sit up and discuss it like they're real people.
Well, he looks ashamed that you told that,
No, but he's reading it.
so. Thank you. Yes.
When you follow your passions and your dreams, and you're like the only person that's writing, and you're the caboose pretty much. How do you do work-life balance? Like, how do you balance writing and then making time for yourself?
Did you all hear that? She wants to know how I balance my time. Well, in the beginning, I think, it was a little easier, but then as I wrote more books and I had more readers and I started communicating back and forth, and the traveling was a little bit more, the tours were getting a little bit bigger with each of the books, then it was a little bit harder home-wise. But what has really allowed me, a great opportunity, and it's been a blessing for me to balance everything out, is that my husband has been with me alongside, pushing me and encouraging me, all along the way. This is my 20th national tour that I'm traveling on for the 20th book, and Will has traveled on all 20 of those. And so that helps me. That's a great deal. It does. So he's with me, and a lot of times I will say, gosh, I'll look at, depending on what year it is, and I start to see the schedule, when the publisher, we're kind of in the initial talks about which cities to go to and, what events, and this time they actually added on other cities. And so you start thinking, wow, I'm not really a spring chicken anymore. So, I start to feel it physically. This is the best part of what I do with my career, next to writing the stories. But physically, when you're flying in the morning and your flight is at 6 a.m., so you're up at 3:30, and there's media when I get to a city, and then I have an event at night, and maybe that's not over until 9 or 9:30, you start to feel it. And so one day I said to him, I was like, gosh, it's just, I'm so thankful, that you love me enough and we have that kind of a marriage, that we want to be together and you don't mind traveling, around. And he's like, well, it's enjoyable to me. I guess it's work for me, but it's enjoyable to him. So he loves it, and he has a great time. But as far as at home, especially when I'm talking about family members, like I don't have children and that was just by choice. And now I recognize that I couldn't, because I never could have been a mom who left my children as much as we're gone now. But my nieces and nephews who, if they were here, they're very proud and loud about it when they say, we don't want you to have any children. So, we're fine. Aunt Kim doesn't need any, so that's it. But even to try to spend as much time with them as I would like and to see my aunts and uncles, which I have not been able to do as much, throughout the years on certain times, and I really had to start paying attention to that. You recognize how short life is, and I love my career, but, my family definitely has to be first. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I just have to say this, Will sounds like such a wonderful, encouraging husband.
Yes.
Would you mind introducing him to us?
Yes, if you turn around, he's the man in the back with the black and white on. Thank you for that. Thank you. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I was told to ask you from the KMC Sister Circle, because you have such a large fan base, both in Germany and England, we discovered by talking to
Yes.
others. Do you ever see yourself perhaps going over there once and doing a tour?
Well, I would hope so. Yeah, I would love to do that at some point. So I guess it's something that just has to be scheduled and, set up. I have to find a group or a bookstore that, is willing to host something like that. So, yeah, so you could find it, huh? Yes. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Hi. I'm a fan of Curtis Black also,
Uh-huh.
but I really love some of the earlier books. In particular, excuse me, there was this one, and it may be behind closer. It was the one where the R&B singer met the bad boy rapper.
Now, unless you guys remember something like that in one of my books, I don't think, and I'm trying to think whose book that is.
It was your writing, because and then you went into the Curtis Black series. I think it was behind closed doors, and I haven't cared.
Now, what is it? No, it was an R&B rapper, and who was the? What was?
It was like an up and coming. She was a new up and coming singer, and he was more of an established, I think, like R&B.
Okay, no, no. Do you know who it is?
I can't remember, but I think her name was on it at one of the people that
Oh,
it was somewhere on there.
okay. Okay, yep, sorry. No, it wasn't me, though. Yes.
I had told you earlier that I had read all of your books. But Charlotte, I just don't like her. It's like it's real life. I think she gets away with too much. I mean, I know it's fiction. Sometimes fiction.
Oh, yeah.
I think she does too much stuff and get away with it. And Reverend Black is trying to go the way. I guess he's trying to go the straight and narrow path until he came up with that last little girl. The mother died, they had 2 ladies. But, I don't know. I think she does too many things and then she ends up coming out on top.
Yeah, she does.
Too many bad things.
She does. But you know that my grandmother used to say, which you've all heard plenty of times, even iron wears out. So, eventually she'll have to learn her lesson. Yes. 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 2 more questions. Okay, so one right here.
When she brought up Charlotte, I remembered Raquel's father. He was trying to blackmail Charlotte in the house debate. Now, is he ever going to, he needs to be busted for that, I think. This has got away clean with that.
Yeah, you'll likely see him again, though. Okay. Yes. One more, yes.
When are you coming out with your story?
I don't know. And I never thought so much about it until I started being asked, by readers and, the way that you're asking now. So I'll have to see. I never thought it was as interesting, and until, so maybe I will, and you hope that, you've done something that can inspire people. That's any of our hope, so we'll have to see. And just make it up as I go. But I am going to think about it, and I especially, would like to write what it was like for me to continue on with my career when I found out my mom had a brain tumor, and that was at the very beginning of it. And the whole idea of finally hearing, that they had done all they could do, and knowing that I was going to lose the most important person in my life, and really, for the first time in my life, questioning God and being angry with him, and wondering how was he going to expect me to go on without her. And then hearing her say, you will go on, you'll do all the things that I hoped and prayed for you, and though you don't know it, you will wake up one day when I'm gone and you'll be happy again. And so, when I think about all that I've been through, then maybe there is a story, to tell, and one that, allows you to just deal with all the trials and the obstacles that we all have to overcome. Yeah, so thank you all so very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Kimberla. Thanks very much for coming. I wish I could tell you that the Prodigal Son, copies of which are available for sale, but those of you who are early birds, snap them all up. However, there are a few other copies of some of Kimberla's other books, and she'll be outside signing copies if you bought it, if you want to buy something else. And our series of contemporary African-American authors continues on June 25th, when Victoria Christopher Murray comes to talk about her new book, Forever an X. We'll see you next time.